Welcome back to the channel. Racer X here, and today I'm back with my good buddies at Stingray Chevrolet in Plant City, Florida, just east of Tampa. And they've got a car that I wanted to show you guys. It's one I've never done a review on before, a really wacky Mopar. And I'm gonna let you guys be the judge. Is it one of the worst Mopars they've ever done, or is there something really cool about it? It should be a fun, different kind of video. If you guys are brand new to my channel, don't forget to hit subscribe right over here in the corner. Turns out only 21% of you guys watching at home are actually subscribed to the channel. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you're notified when my new content comes out, and off we go.
T-minus 15 seconds.
These guys have some really solid inventory here. They've been selling a ton of cars. Usually they have this lot really full, but you can see the quality of some of the things that they have. They've got all sorts of Camaros. They've got the older vets over there. Right over here, they've got a beautiful Hell-Raising Red Eye. This is a bad boy right here. This thing, very low mileage Red Eye. Of course, you can see all of these C8s they have out here. Really nice Daytona, Scat Pack right here. List goes on. They've got Mercedes, all sorts of stuff. And here is the car that I wanted to show you. That is a 2000 Plymouth Prowler. Now, of course, we know Plymouth kind of went the way of the wind, so no longer a thing, but part of the Mopar family. And people are all over the map in terms of, is this one of the best Mopars made, or absolutely one of the worst? It's certainly one of the most different and unique. So let's take a little walk around and I will show you why this car is just so different. Just take a look at the lines on this Prowler. They are very, very unique, and they actually only made this car from 1997 until 2002, so this hasn't been around in over 20 years. And just look at the lines on it. This is actually inspired by a 1932 Ford vehicle, and you can see just what weird lines it has. It's got these bumpers that stick way out that look pretty plasticky. You can see how the front wheels are basically separated from the body. That is definitely an old school look and feel. And as you jump to the back of it, you can see it's got a pretty good set of tires on the back, and it is very wide. And one thing you do not get, and it may not pick it up on camera very well, but this car sits extremely low. I didn't realize Prowler sat so low until I stood right here next to it, and it basically doesn't even, it barely comes up to my belly buttons. I just had no idea. From the back, this car does look pretty striking. Look how wide this thing is, especially at this angle. You do see the dual exhaust, pretty good sized tires under the back of this, and it actually was pretty underpowered back in the day. We'll talk about the power numbers on this, but there are all sorts of wacky traits to the Prowler that we should probably run through. Now, the Prowler actually came out in both a coupe and a convertible like this one, and we actually saw this car for the first time in like 1993. They had a show car, and it only came in purple. That's how this thing started out. And 214 horsepower out of a 3.5 liter V6. It was actually the V6 that came prior to the Pentastar engine that we see in the V6 trims now. And a lot of people thought it was really, really underpowered. 214 horsepower, not a whole lot, especially for a car that looks as crazy as this. Now, the wheels on this car are very different. First of all, you see this cover that sits away from the body of the car. It comes very, very close to the tire itself. So just very different look altogether. I will kind of show you that gap once again. And it is kind of strange. In 1999, they gave this thing a power bump to 253 horsepower and 255 pound-feet of torque, which still is not very much. Yet they stuck big old 295s on the rear end of this thing, which just seems like overkill with that much power. I will go ahead and show you the bumpers here as well. And one of the major kind of flaws with this particular car was, in fact, these extremely plasticky looking bumpers. A lot of people really hated them, and a lot of the people that own these cars would actually take the bumpers completely off just to give it a more streamlined look. One other quick wacky detail about this particular car, they actually made trailers to match the car. The paint matched, everything like that. Even the shape of it was kind of similar to the car. And back in the day, you would see these things tow in this trailer because you really can't fit much in the back of that, but you would see these trailers being towed by these that looked just kind of out of this world different, and being towed by something that already looks kind of interesting. So food for thought. take a look at this car from this angle. I mean, yeah, it looks really, really strange. If you saw this behind you in traffic, you would wonder what in the world was back there. It is kind of cool. I mean, it's different. Now, another thing that's different about this car, it does have a rear-mounted transmission. So it actually puts all the power from the V6 down through a torque tube that then goes through the rear-mounted transmission to the rear wheels. And when you actually get inside the car, there's a couple other wacky things. First of all, when you open the door, that is as wide as it goes. It doesn't open any wider than that. So you got to kind of snug yourself through this little opening here. And then on the inside, things get even more strange. Let me show you. So for those of you wondering what it's like to sit in a Plymouth Prowler, well, here you go. So right over here, your door and window controls basically right where you would expect to see them. Now, right here, you've got your RPMs, your tachometer, and this actually attaches to the steering wheel stalk itself. So it moves up and down with the steering wheel. And all your other gauges are here in the middle. You've got your speedometer there. And of course, right over there, your temperature gauge. You've got your fuel, oil temp, and then of course your volts there for the battery. Your audio controls, your climate controls right here in the middle. You do kind of get an auto volume deal right here. That's kind of different. You can see those Prowler floor mats there, another speaker. Different place to sit altogether. The seats in this are actually quite comfortable. You can see the headrest there, kind of a different deal. You've got a speaker here in the back, a very small window behind you. I will actually show you more about that in just a second. A small storage compartment here, your e-brake, and then of course your gear selector there. So a really snug fit in the Prowler, but not bad, just very different. I want to give you a quick look at what's under the hood of the 2000 Plymouth Prowler, and once again, very different. There's that 3.5 liter V6, as I mentioned before. You can see the Prowler right there as well, and it gets pretty different up here. You can see you've got the radiator right in the front. Now, up here, there is your battery right at the very tip of the car. You do notice just how narrow the front of this car is. It's really shaped like a teardrop, really wide at the back, and there are your springs right in there. So your suspension is located really in close, basically right in the center of the vehicle. So I really have never seen another vehicle with that type of geometry to it. Now, the Prowler had an initial MSRP of somewhere around $40,000, which by today's money would be around 60,000 bucks. And some people would say, look, that's a fantastic deal for that. It's very unique, had some cool factor. And other people would say, look, that's an absolute ripoff. The thing's a piece of junk. Why would anybody pay that kind of money? It just depends on who you're talking to, and people really are all over the board when it comes to the reviews on this. By and large, most people would agree that it was very down on power with that 3.5 liter V6. Even the later years were like 253 horsepower. Not a lot of horsepower, although it only weighed 2,800 pounds. Most people said if it's going to look like that, it should have a V8. Put that 5.7 in there, and the reason they didn't is because that nose, you see how narrow it is. The truth of the matter is it just would not fit a V8 in there because of the geometry of the car. Another kind of wacky thing about the Prowler. It may not actually look like it on camera, but it is a pretty snug fit in this car. I don't have a whole lot of room here, and there's not a ton of shoulder room as well. If you're sitting next to a fairly sizable person, you literally will be shoulder to shoulder. But a different place to sit indeed. The windows in this car are actually really small, and a little bit of rumble for a V6, but the windows here are tiny. They actually make a Camaro's windows look big. Same thing with this window, really, really small, very slanted windshield in front of me. And so from a visibility perspective, not a ton of visibility, pretty tight quarters in here. It actually reminds me a little bit of a Viper, and the comparison actually doesn't stop there. Now, I know it might be odd to compare this to a Viper because the Viper is so beloved by so many people. And this thing, truth is, a lot of people hated this car. And there were some people that actually really loved this car, but they no longer sell Vipers, just like they no longer sell this. Plymouth, as I mentioned, is no longer even a thing. Well, the Viper, they never did sell that many units of the Viper. They sold about 30,000, but that was over a really long span. This one from 1997 to 2002, 12,000 units, not very many. And this was actually supposed to be the savior of Plymouth. Well, we see how that worked out. But when you really think about it, they kind of went out on a limb with this car, right? They put some wacky design characteristics into this car, and they kind of hoped that people would see that they just went out on a limb and they did something different, something kind of cool and retro, and they just sort of hoped it would work. Well, the Viper is kind of the same thing. That was just something that was way out in left field from a design perspective. And yeah, I realize those are hand-built supercars, and they're just really, really cool. And even though they didn't sell all that many, and that's why they no longer sell them, everybody kind of loves the Viper, including myself. I absolutely love the Viper. I've always thought this one was just sort of an oddball. Now, a lot of people knock the Prowler for multiple reasons, as I mentioned. A lot of people said the ride quality in these things was absolutely terrible. You see the geometry on this, the suspension geometry, everything about this car is very different. They said it was loud on the interior, it was really underpowered. I mean, all sorts of knocks on this particular car, but it is very different. How often do you see one of these things cruising down the road? So I will give it that. This car only has 32,000 miles on it, so it's like barely broken in. And as I start to drive it, yeah, it is pretty noisy on the inside. And as you can probably tell by my camera, it's also pretty bumpy. So it kind of reminds me, as I mentioned before, of the early Vipers, because that car basically drove like a freaking plow. Difference is that car looked really, really freaking cool. This one's just kind of on the spectrum of really different. Now, I don't necessarily hate this car. Like I said, I mean, if you're looking for something that's different that you don't see every day, this would certainly be a good contender for you. Is it underpowered? Well, oh, you can do it. Yeah, it's trying. So I think 0 to 60 on this car was somewhere in like the 7.5 second range. So pretty darn slow. And even though it only weighs 2,800 pounds, it still feels like it doesn't really want to get up to speed. Like I said, the coolness of this car really comes in the look of it. I mean, that's really the most unique thing about this. It's not going to set the world on fire. From a dig, it doesn't feel too bad. It kind of gets out of here. It doesn't spin the tires at all with those big 295s back there. It is pretty bumpy, and the handling is pretty sluggish. It would definitely take a unique buyer to buy something like this. Like I said, just the endearing quality of this is that it looks basically like a Ford from the 1930s. And like I said, you will not see anything else like this on the road unless you literally are looking at a really old Ford or something from that era, maybe. But how often do you see something like that on the road? But it's crazy to think about something like this. It's over 20 years old, what, 23 years old now, and it still runs and drives great. Just like I said, it's very, very different. There are some squeaks in this car as well. Now, I did notice there's kind of a rudimentary Sportronic type shifter here. If I go back this way, I can kind of shift it. And this is a 4-speed auto in this, so it's not like the transmission is all that great either in this. But like I said, from this era, that's kind of what you got. And we're going to go ahead and give it just a little bit right here. Nice little hard shift there. Feels like it should be shifting, but it's not. There it goes. I knew it was coming. 4-speed automatic in this, not ideal, and we're going and we're going. So anyway, it's not a race car by any stretch of the imagination, but I am seeing a lot of people look at the car. Everybody's kind of looking at it. I don't know if they're looking at it because they like it or they don't. It's hard to tell. Okay, now the brakes, also pretty sluggish on this car. I was noticing earlier the brakes on this are pretty small. Went to slow down to come into the dealership, and not a lot of braking power on this car either. So what do you do? All right, guys, I'm gonna go put this car back. Definitely a different type of deal altogether. If you like this car and you think it's cool, and you're looking for something different, give these guys a call up here at Stingray Chevrolet in Plant City. Fantastic guys to work with. I love that the fact they don't sell anything over sticker. None of their new cars are over sticker at all. They just don't do that here. Another reason I like working with these guys. There are several other dealerships in the Tampa area that don't sell over stickers. So anyway, guys, if you want a Prowler and you want a yellow convertible, this is your car. Give these guys a shout. And that about does it for my review of the 2000 Plymouth Prowler. What a wacky car. I don't know what side of the fence you guys sit on, but it is very, very unique. So what do you think? Was this a huge mistake by Mopar to put this car out, or do you think it was kind of cool that they even tried it? I'd love to hear it in the comments down below, and I will catch you on the next one. So until then, Racer X.